Welcome to The Debate. Right now, your body is hosting roughly 39 trillion microorganisms.
Which is, frankly, a little unsettling if you dwell on it too long.
Oh, definitely. But at the exact same time, your smartwatch is tracking, hundreds of thousands of data points about your heart rate, your temperature, your movement.
Right.
And both of these realms hold the key to the future of human health. But the real question is, which one is actually going to save your life?
Exactly. Today, we are exploring the unprecedented integration of artificial intelligence into global healthcare and biology.
And it's an integration that is literally generating petabytes of multidimensional data every single day.
It is staggering. So here is the central question we're tackling. In this massive shift we're seeing from reactive medicine to preventive medicine, where does AI make its most critical contribution?
Right. Does its true power lie in macro-level multimodal data fusion, which basically means synthesizing accessible proxy data like wearables and clinical records to predict systemic health trends?
Or does AI's ultimate value lie in micro-level biological decoding? Unraveling complex, hidden ecosystems like bacterial DNA in the human microbiome to identify the absolute root biological mechanisms of a disease.
I'm taking the position that AI's profound revolution is that micro-level decoding. I argue that correlating proxy data is undeniably useful, but it really only scratches the surface.
And I'll be representing the opposing view. I believe AI's greatest power is macro-level multimodal data fusion. By weaving completely disparate streams of proxy data into unified predictive insights, we can actually avert systemic crises on a massive global scale.
Well, by mapping the biological dark matter of the microbiome, AI decodes the fundamental drivers of disease. It allows us to cure the root cause rather than just, perpetually managing downstream symptoms.
Let's unpack the macro-level fusion first, because, frankly, traditional medicine has historically been terrible at this. It isolates data.
Oh, totally. It's incredibly siloed.
Right. A cardiologist looks at your EKGs, an endocrinologist looks at your glucose levels, and because they don't talk to each other, they miss critical systemic links. AI changes the game through what we call orthogonal fusion. It's a heavy academic term, but it basically means taking completely different languages of data, say, your heart rate variability, your sleep architecture, and your clinical blood work, and processing them simultaneously.
Okay, but
AI architectures, like transformers specifically, can cross-reference these diverse signals into incredibly accurate predictive engines.
I get the mechanics of it, but you are still relying on proxies. You're essentially looking at the shadow on the wall, not the object casting it.
I see why you'd say that, but let me give you a different perspective on how we define clinical value, especially at scale. Think about the global burden of metabolic disease.
It's massive, yeah.
Right now, to truly measure if someone is insulin resistant, the clinical gold standard is this thing called the hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp.
A miserable procedure.
It's grueling. It's an hours-long intravenous process where doctors continuously infuse insulin and glucose into a patient's veins just to see exactly how their cells absorb sugar.
Highly invasive, yes.
Highly invasive, incredibly expensive, and completely impractical for the general population. But today, we have roughly 10 million continuous glucose monitors, or CGMs, and like 1.5 billion smartphone sensors in the wild.
Right.
AI can look at the data from those ubiquitous devices and predict complex conditions like insulin resistance without ever needing that invasive clamp test. We're talking about macro-level synthesis that could potentially avert 40% of preventable deaths.
I hear that, and the scale is impressive. But I actually think correlating that proxy data is, it's avoiding the real biological reality.
How so?
If we really want to prevent disease, AI's true revolution isn't on the wrist, it's in the gut. You mentioned we have 10 million CGMs, but every single human body contains those 39 trillion microorganisms I mentioned earlier.
Sure, the scale is different.
It's astronomical. On Earth, there are 10 to the 30th power bacteria, and for decades, we were completely blind to how these microbes functioned because traditional microbiology relies on culturing. You swab a sample onto an agar plate and, wait to see what grows.
Right, the classic Petri dish approach from high school biology.
Exactly. But the problem is, over 99% of bacterial species simply refuse to grow in a Petri dish.
Really? 99%?
Over 99%. They require the exact acidic, anaerobic chaos of the human gut or the precise pressure of the deep ocean to survive. So we couldn't study them. But today, AI processes petabytes of metagenomic sequencing data.
Ah, so bypassing the culturing altogether.
Exactly. Instead of trying to grow them, we just sequence the raw DNA found in a sample and use AI to reconstruct those uncultured genomes. We can finally track dysbiosis, which is that dangerous imbalance of these microbes.
Okay, but
By identifying how specific microbial imbalances fuel global epidemics from obesity to antimicrobial resistance, which kills 1.27 million people annually, AI illuminates the exact biological root causes of a disease.
I mean, that is intellectually fascinating. It really is. But let's stick to metabolic health for a moment, just to compare apples to apples.
Sure.
Insulin resistance is a silent saboteur. It exhausts the pancreas over years and leads to type 2 diabetes, which is projected to afflict like 540 million people globally. You don't always need to know the exact molecular root cause if you have a highly reliable predictive proxy to just stop the disease in its tracks.
But a proxy is just an educated guess.
A highly accurate one. Look at a 2024 Mayo Clinic study. They used long short-term memory networks, or LSTMs. Unlike standard AI that just looks at a single snapshot in time, LSTMs have a memory. They look at sequence data over time.
Right, for time series data.
Exactly. The AI was able to analyze the subtle hidden patterns in just 14 days of standard wearable data and predict a patient's Masuda index, which is a direct proxy for that grueling clamp test with 88% accuracy.
I'm sorry. But I just don't buy that that is the ultimate solution.
88% accuracy from a watch isn't a solution?
Let me tell you why it's not. What is the LSTM actually measuring there? It's digesting continuous glucose curves, calculating variations, time above range. It is mathematically brilliant at finding patterns, yes. But physiologically, it is diagnosing the aftermath of a biological breakdown.
The aftermath?
Yes, the damage at the cellular level is already occurring by the time the glucose spikes.
But it's diagnosing that breakdown early enough to reverse it, which is the entire point of preventative medicine. Platforms like Virta Health are taking this continuous glucose data, running it through their AI models, and actively reversing insulin resistance in 60% of cases.
Through lifestyle changes, right?
Through targeted behavioral and dietary coaching, yeah. That proves we do not need to sequence every single patient's microbiome to achieve massive population-level health victories. AI translates everyday proxy data into clinical gold.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered what happens when those behavioral nudges fail? Or, why some people develop severe insulin resistance on a diet that keeps another person perfectly healthy?
Well, genetics play a role.
You cannot solve that mystery with an Apple Watch. You have to look at the gut. Metabolic crashes are driven by underlying dysbiosis, which AI can now directly map.
Okay, but how exactly does mapping the gut practically change the treatment protocol for insulin resistance?
Because it identifies the actual mechanical failure. Look at BioMe AI in India. They're using AI to analyze metagenomic data, and they found a direct link between specific declines in a bacteria called Akkermansia and poor glycemic control.
Akkermansia, okay.
Yeah, it actually feeds on the mucin layer of your gut lining. When you have healthy levels of it, it produces short-chain fatty acids that signal your cellular receptors to remain sensitive to insulin.
Ah, I see.
Right. When that bacteria dies off, the signaling stops and you become insulin resistant. Or look at the Zoe app in Europe. It predicts postprandial glycemic peaks directly via microbiome testing. They are targeting the actual mechanisms, the inflammatory pathways, the missing fatty acids that cause the cell receptors to ignore insulin in the first place.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it very differently in terms of global priorities.
Okay, how so?
Think of multimodal fusion like building a highly accurate radar system. It predicts exactly when and where a storm will hit based on wind and temperature proxies, which allows cities to evacuate and save lives.
A cute analogy, but
Let me finish. Knowing the exact quantum mechanics of a single raindrop, which is what profiling the Akkermansia bacteria feels like in this context, is arguably far less urgent when you have 540 million people facing a metabolic storm right now.
Your radar analogy assumes the storm is inevitable and we just need to brace for it with behavioral coaching. But what if we could dissipate the storm before it even forms?
By tweaking gut bacteria?
By mapping the biological dark matter, yes. We aren't just studying raindrops, we are identifying the atmospheric seeds of the storm. And getting to that granular level requires an immense computational lift, which is precisely why AI is the hero of the story.
I completely agree that genomics is incredibly complex. But walk me through why AI is the only way to do this. Scientists have been studying DNA for decades.
It comes down to the sheer computational impossibility of manual genomics. Think of a stool sample or an ocean water sample, like a massive jigsaw puzzle that has been put through a wood chipper.
Ouch. Okay.
And you don't just have one puzzle. You have thousands of different puzzles mixed together, representing fragmented DNA from thousands of different bacterial species. A single metagenomic shotgun sequencing run yields 100 gigabases of this chaotic data.
100 gigabases? Wow.
Manual assembly is entirely futile. No human could ever put that puzzle back together.
So how does the AI piece it together without a reference picture?
Through systems like Metaspades, they use graph neural networks to look at the overlapping edges of these tiny pieces, which are called chimers in bioinformatics, and they logically stitch them back together into full bacterial genomes.
Just purely computationally?
Exactly. This AI process boosts a metric called contig N50 contiguity by 40%. Simply put, it's successfully reconstructing entire, never-before-seen life forms computationally in a matter of minutes.
Okay, that is impressive.
We use deep learning models to classify these fragments and reconstruct entirely uncultured pathogens. This isn't just a marginal improvement in biology. AI makes the previously insurmountable task of biological decoding actually possible.
Look, I won't deny that's a brilliant technological feat, but I'm not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning because you're focusing entirely on a biological bottleneck.
Which is the most important bottleneck?
I disagreed. I argued that the greater global bottleneck isn't assembling DNA fragments from a wood chipper. The greatest barrier to global health is data silos and a lack of interoperability across vast, heterogeneous healthcare systems around the world.
Well, data is messy, sure.
It's more than messy. It's locked away. The true triumph of AI in global health is federated learning.
Federated learning is a brilliant mechanism of software distribution. I'll give you that. But it isn't a biological insight.
But without that distribution, the biological insights are useless. They just remain locked inside wealthy industrialized silos. Think about how AI training traditionally works. Normally, to train a massive AI model, you have to pull all the data into one central server.
Right.
But in healthcare, you absolutely cannot do that. Patient data is heavily protected by privacy laws like GDPR in Europe, HIPAA in the US, LGBT in Brazil. So federated learning flips the model. Instead of moving the sensitive data to the AI, we send the AI out to the data.
Right. The model trains locally inside the individual hospital.
Exactly. It trains locally on proprietary data, learns the patterns, and then it only sends the mathematical weights and gradients back to a central server. It aggregates that learning globally without ever exposing a single piece of raw patient info. Look at Brazil's public health system, the SUS. They use IBM Watson across 300 million patient records using this exact method.
Which is great for logistics.
It's great for equity. By using federated learning to average these insights across wildly diverse demographic data, AI solves the data poverty that drastically limits your sequencing-heavy approaches. It builds global predictive models that actually work for everyone, not just the tiny fraction of the population that can afford a 100 gigabytes shotgun sequencing run.
I completely agree that equity is essential and federated learning is a deeply elegant mathematical solution to privacy laws, but we have to ask what we are training those federated models on.
Real-world data.
But if you're just federating proxy data, heart rates, step counts, basic blood panels, you are still just building a very sophisticated system of educated guesses. If we want true personalized medicine, the personalization must be biological, not just statistical.
A statistical profile, when derived from millions of multidimensional data points,
becomes a highly accurate digital twin of the patient. That allows for incredibly precise preventative interventions.
But a statistical twin is not a biological cure. AI in microbiological decoding isn't just profiling a patient. It is actively engineering therapeutics to heal them.
Like what?
Take Sarah's Therapeutics as an example. They use AI to profile donor stool DNA for fecal microbiota transplants to treat C. diff infections.
C. diff is terrible, yeah.
It's a horrific, often fatal gut infection that takes over when antibiotics wipe out a patient's good bacteria. Ceres uses AI to match specific healthy bacterial genomes to a patient's exact state of dysbiosis. The AI finds the exact metabolic pathways the bad bacteria are exploiting, and it introduces good bacteria to outcompete them. We are seeing 90% cure rates with this AI-engineered approach.
Wow, okay, 90% is an incredible therapeutic application.
And that goes beyond just bacteria. Look at AlphaFold from DeepMind. Proteins are like these intricate, folded-up molecular machines, and for decades, figuring out exactly how they fold was one of the hardest problems in all of biology.
Right, the protein folding problem.
Exactly. AlphaFold uses AI to predict that 3D structure directly from the linear DNA sequence, revealing the exact functions of enzymes. AI is directly designing live biotherapeutics and engineered probiotics. It is actively creating the medicine, not just predicting who might need it in the future.
I see the power in that. I really do. But I return to the idea that true personalization requires a holistic view, not just a microbiological snapshot. The microbiome and the genome, they don't exist in a vacuum.
Of course not.
This is where graph convolutional networks become so powerful in multimodal fusion. They can model a patient's genome, but they simultaneously fuse that genetic data with environmental, behavioral, and clinical data.
Okay, give me a tangible example of how cross-referencing all of that actually changes the clinical outcome.
Let's look at precision oncology. An AI model can look at a specific genetic variant, say a BRCA1 mutation, which we know increases the risk of certain cancers.
Right.
But the AI doesn't stop at the DNA sequence. Through multimodal fusion, it cross-references that genetic data with environmental proxies. It can predict how that specific BRCA1 variant will amplify the toxicity of a chemotherapy drug specifically when the patient is subjected to high oxidative stress from heavy urban pollution in Mexico City.
Okay, that is an incredibly complex web to untangle. I'll grant you that.
Right. It captures the complex interaction between genes and the environment, which biologists call epistasis. To explain it simply, think of the genome like the blueprint for a building, and that BRCA1 mutation is a structural weakness in the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
In a quiet, clean suburb, that house might stand perfectly fine for decades without any issues. But if you build that exact same house in an earthquake zone, which represents the severe environmental stress of pollution, it collapses.
I see where you're going.
The AI's job isn't just to read the blueprint. It's to look at the seismic activity all around it. By focusing entirely on the microscopic scale, the folded proteins, the bacterial strains, you risk missing the massive socio-environmental earthquakes that activate those precise genetic or microbial vulnerabilities.
That is actually a very fair critique. The environment certainly modulates gene expression and microbial balances, but I would counter that the environment's impact is ultimately registered at the microscopic level.
How do you mean?
Heavy pollution in Mexico City causes oxidative stress, yes? But what does that stress physically do? It shifts the microbiome. It alters metabolic flux at the cellular level. AI allows us to see the exact molecular damage of that earthquake.
But you still just looking at the rubble.
No, we're tracking the fault lines. Furthermore, when we use AI to track the spread of antimicrobial resistance, AMR, by analyzing wastewater DNA across different cities, we are literally looking at the foundational map of life. We are tracking plasmids and resistance cassettes transferring between bacteria in real time.
That is a massive scale, I admit.
If we don't use AI to decode that dark matter, your macro-level predictions will eventually fail because the underlying pathogens will have evolved completely past our proxy metrics.
So it seems we're really looking at two very different horizons of intervention here. You see AI's greatest power in its ability to map and engineer the microscopic foundation of life.
Yes.
Well, I see its transformative power in synthesizing the macroscopic environment to predict and prevent systemic collapse.
Precisely. Let's summarize where this leaves us in the grand scheme of things. From my perspective, deciphering the biological dark matter of bacterial DNA and human microbiomes is AI's most profound contribution to science. It provides the essential foundational map. By using AI to assemble uncultured genomes from the wood chipper of raw DNA, predict complex protein structures with AlphaFold, and engineer live biotherapeutics, medicine is finally able to cure diseases at their molecular and microbial origin, rather than perpetually managing their downstream ripples.
And from my perspective, AI's macro-level multimodal fusion is the most viable, immediate path to democratizing preventative medicine globally. By transforming ubiquitous non-invasive data streams from the continuous glucose monitors on our arms to environmental sensors and federated electronic health records into unified predictive insights, AI empowers us to avert chronic diseases before they take root.
It's certainly a broader net.
It shifts the entire global health apparatus from reactive firefighting to systemic foresight. But I think where we absolutely converge today is on the total obsolescence of traditional single-variable human analysis.
Oh, 100%. Whether a doctor is looking at a single fasting glucose number on a chart, or a scientist is trying to manually interpret a basic bacterial culture in a petri dish, that approach is entirely inadequate in the face of modern biology's complexity.
Absolutely. The human brain simply cannot compute the millions of cross-correlations happening simultaneously in the human body. AI's ability to handle multidimensional data at unprecedented scales and, crucially, to do so equitably across wildly diverse global populations via federated learning is what ultimately transforms health data from a chaotic deluge into actionable foresight.
It brings us back to the overarching theme. We're no longer just reacting to the symptoms, we're modeling the entire system.
Exactly. We leave it to you, the listener, to weigh whether the macro symphony of multimodal data or the micro-precision of microbial decoding represents the true leading edge. There are even more intricate layers of how AI is orchestrating the future of global vitality waiting to be explored in the source material.
There really is so much more to it.
But the next time you glance at your smartwatch to check your heart rate or think about the trillions of microscopic ecosystems living within you, ask yourself, are we better off predicting exactly when the storm will break or finally understanding the quantum mechanics of the raindrop?